Hi, my name is Helen Woodrum, and I was asked to come and provide some information to all of you about how COVID-19 and the effects on our daily lives might be impacting our brain health. So I gathered some information, reviewed some of the more recent research being done, and use some of the questions I'm asked most often when I'm in therapy with individuals as a guide, because if they had those questions, it's pretty likely that other people would have those questions too. So the first question that I looked at was, how is my brain being affected by COVID-19? And I kind of broke this up into two different categories of direct effects if you have the virus and indirect effects even if you haven't had the virus. So some of the more direct effects can include neurological problems caused by the virus itself, and many times this can lead to anxiety and depression. Other common symptoms when you have the virus have been reported as fatigue, headaches, memory loss, and difficulty with attention and concentration. They think that this happens because there's inflammation being caused by the virus in your brain, and it impacts your blood supply, so your brain isn't getting quite as much oxygen as it needs. And this has to do with the center of your brain that detects smell and taste, which we're all more familiar with now because that's one of the characteristic symptoms. So along with that, it can impact your learning, your mood, and your thought processes. If you haven't had the virus, many of us have become more familiar with how isolation and chronic worry can impact us from day to day. Those are two of the most common effects of some of the precautionary measures that we've all taken to avoid contracting the virus, but they've certainly had a big impact on our lives. And as humans, when we're isolated and worrying, it causes changes in our brains' ability to refresh and heal itself like it normally does, and it can actually impact our brain chemistry and contribute to depression and other mood disorders later on. Chronic stress, when we experience that as humans, it really throws us into survival mode. We think with our civilized brains under normal circumstances, but we're really hardwired to be hunter-gatherers as we were not that long ago. And when we're experiencing chronic stress, we just stay in our hunter-gatherer or survival brain mode because our brain is telling us you're at risk and your life may be in danger, so you need to function in this way to keep yourself alive. But with a threat like COVID-19, it's not a danger that we can see necessarily, and our hunter-gatherer brains don't know how to make sense of that. So they do know how to make sense of a tiger standing in the room with you and knowing that you need to run away from that tiger to save your life, but when there's this invisible threat, it's much harder to make sense of. So our brain says, well, it's better to err on the side of caution. We'll just stay in this survival mode. However, we can't function very well in survival mode over a length of time. So a lot of us are noticing right now that we're kind of maxing out and feeling really fatigued. We'll talk more about that later. When we function in survival mode over a long amount of time, like 6 months, it can really throw us into a state of anxiety or depression. We've been kicked out of our normal routines that allow us to kind of function on autopilot when we're in survival mode. So we can't even really rely on things that have always given us a sense of normalcy. And we're having a hard time adapting to that. In addition to stress hormones that are being released and causing inflammation in our bodies and affecting memory, and stress hormones also can, they turn on that survival mode in our brain. So when that is on, we have a harder time accessing our more rational, logical brains. And then we can't access that wisdom that we've gained over the past 6 months. So, is there anything we can do about that? There are some short-term measures we can take, like practicing mindfulness. And mindfulness is kind of a buzzword right now, and a lot of people get confused by that. But you can do anything mindfully. You can walk mindfully. You can do the dishes mindfully. You can meditate mindfully, and that's what people most commonly think of. But mindfulness is, in a simplified explanation, is just putting all of your attention with all 5 of your senses onto an activity. So if I'm doing the dishes mindfully, I'm going to focus on how it feels to wipe the dishes off with the rag, how the water feels on my hands, how the floor feels underneath my feet, what do I smell, what do I hear. And that really just helps keep our brain focused on the present instead of wandering too far into the future or the past that might influence how we're feeling in that moment. And reminds us that, we just need to stay in the here and now when we can, because we don't have a foundation of experience to know what to do in these circumstances, and there's a lot of uncertainty still for the future. So it's not necessarily helpful for us to try to problem solve that or intellectualize it too much. You want to be informed and take precautions, but we're not going to be able to tell what's going to happen in the future. Many scientists don't know what's going to happen in the future. It's kind of a big question mark, and we have to wait and see. So just staying in the moment can be really helpful for a lot of people, and it trains your brain to be more present in the here and now. Getting adequate sleep is really important. 6 hours is like a bare minimum. More than that is better. Some people can function great on 6 hours, but we really need that consistent 6 to 8 hours in order for our brain to do the healthy healing things it does every night while we're sleeping, and then help us not feel overwhelmed by what's happening in our lives, because it's really stressful. So our brain really knows how to heal itself. We just need to give it the proper sleep to do that. Maintaining connection with other people is very, very important. As humans, we're really hardwired to need to see faces every day. And talking on the phone, a lot of us have felt like, it's great, it gets us by, but we're really missing out on some of the quality of the socialization we've normally gotten. in our lives. And that's because, our brain has mirroring neurons that it needs to see, and those are triggered by seeing faces. We can use video access to see people's faces now, and we weren't able to do that in the past. So we're really fortunate that we can use those resources to help keep our brain processes healthy and working properly. Some techniques that people are using are electronic apps or devices that can help with creating a sense of calm and peacefulness in our environments. We have had to give up some of those things that we might have done in the past to find that comfort and calm, but now we have more resources in electronic formats for like tracking your sleep or playing soothing noises in the background or using your fitness tracker on your watch to monitor your heart rate and detect, are there periods in your day that are more stressful and you're seeing a big increase in your pulse rate. That can be an indicator of stress, and using that information to make some changes in your day-to-day life and see if that's helpful. There's also like mood tracking apps. When you're feeling down and depressed or very anxious, it's really hard to objectively monitor your mood because you just feel bad. If you feel bad, you feel bad, and it feels like you feel bad every day. The days start to run together, and what's the difference between this bad and that bad? But when you're using a mood tracker or some other kind of stress tracker, anxiety tracker, which there are apps for, you can use pen and paper, it helps you to see, how bad are you feeling? Is there patterns in how bad you feel from day to day? Are there certain activities you do that make you feel more bad than others? Or do you feel really bad consistently? And maybe that's a sign that you could benefit from talking to someone about how bad you feel to see if there's some kind of service that you might benefit from, like therapy or even medications, if that can make life a little bit easier for the time being. So, it's really helpful for your physician or nurse practitioner or psychiatrist or therapist to be able to see that data in that form, because it helps them to also see, how bad are you feeling? Is it kind of bad, or is it really bad? The next question is, what is collective trauma and how does it apply to me? So I think most of us have had experiences with collective trauma at some point in our lives. An example that I often use is September 11th, when it not only impacted us as individuals, but it impacted our entire nation, our community, our household, our family systems. It's one of those events in our life that have a before and after, and that's how you know that it was traumatic. Traumatic means that the experience overwhelmed your capacities to cope. And September 11th kind of overwhelmed all of our capacities to cope with that experience. It was shocking, and it changed how we viewed the world and how it works, and it changed how our nation views the world and how it works. And that really embodies the definition of collective trauma. So if you apply that to the present circumstances, we were kind of shocked awake once we started to see this impacting other people in our nation. And as it got closer to our own communities, it became more concerning, naturally. When we think of March, when this circumstance was evolving, in early April, when we started to learn more about what was happening, so much has changed since that time. And based on influences in our lives, it's really shaping what perspective we have about the world and how it works. And we're still in it, so that's still evolving, and it'll continue to evolve. But it's causing some loss of our normal support systems. So in addition to feeling confused or overwhelmed by navigating all of these changes, we also can't rely on some of those natural supports in our lives, like a church service, for example, to regain a sense of calm. In that specific example, spirituality, relying on your religious practices to give you comfort and reassurance. So the combination of our whole lives changing and not having the supports that we've always had, it's really creating a lot of stuff that we don't know what to do with or how to make sense of it. So we're having to get really creative with finding new supports or improvising our methods for interacting with our support systems now. And it's pretty amazing how everyone has begun to adapt to that. But it was really hard at first. In humans, we don't like change, and we're not going to make these changes unless we're kind of forced into that. So here we are, we've been forced into it, and now we're starting to make those changes. But there's some people that are still struggling to make those changes. And that's when we can find ourselves experiencing depression, anxiety, or other brain health concerns. So another question I hear often is, why can't life just go back to normal? And hopefully we'll get that sense of normalcy again in the future. But right now, it becomes problematic when we try to function like everything is normal, because trauma changes how we view the world, and it adds this filter in our brains of sensing that the world is unsafe and uncertain. And right now, that's legitimate. There are many things that are unsafe, and there's a lot of uncertainty in the future. But when we're still experiencing trauma, we're going to be much more aware of things that we perceive to jeopardize our safety, or things that seem to be uncertain. There's a concept that's being discussed more often called ambiguous loss. And this was originally defined when trying to explain the grief we experience in situations where we lose something, but again, it's not a concrete thing we're losing. We're familiar with grief related to a loved one dying, but what if your loved one has dementia and they haven't died, they're still there, but you've lost the person you've always known? That's a good example of ambiguous loss, where you're losing something, but it's so much more confusing and complicated because you didn't lose it completely, you just lost the parts that were important to you and gave that. So what we're losing right now, as it applies to ambiguous loss, is a way of life, a freedom to do what we want, and without a mask on. We have lost our trust in the predictable future. We have lost the ability to live without significant restrictions on how we're living. We've lost our expectations for experiences like school. You know, we all expect our educational systems, thank you school staff for all the wonderful adaptations you've made. We expect our education systems to function in the way they have. But now we don't have that experience that they've always provided. And that doesn't mean that it's bad or unhelpful. It's difficult to make that adjustment, but what we expected is no longer reality. And that's really hard to wrap your head around. Even more so if we're experiencing all these other things at the same time. So our normal routines and rituals we're also losing as well, like dinner with your grandmother every third Thursday, or going to the gym with a friend that you meet 3 days a week, or getting to go to your yoga class every Monday night. Those are things we're losing that are difficult, and then when we're losing so many other things at once, it really impacts our mood. But because they seem to be small things that we're losing, we have a hard time making sense of how great the losses actually are. So say that we are trying to just go about life as we normally would. When you do that, you're going to encounter barriers in doing what you've normally done. And if we say, nope, I'm just going to go back to normal and live life like I always have, it denies the burden that's on us every day of those barriers that we face in living life as normal. So we really need to acknowledge that none of us are living life normally right now, and that's hard, and it impacts us every day. Everything we do feels more difficult. If I call my electric company to address a problem on my bill, hypothetically, I might have to make 3 phone calls instead of 1 because their company has supported their employees by allowing them to work from home. But it has to then be delegated to each individual at home in a different way, and however their system has adapted to it, it just doesn't seem as easy as it used to. So that's an example of one thing that can be harder. When we go to work, a lot of us have to have our temperature taken. We had to adjust what time we leave our house to get to work on time because there might be an extra 5 minutes or even 1 minute that it takes to put your mask on, get your temperature taken, and get to where you need to be to start your work day. And when you add up 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute, 5 minutes, 1 minute, that throws off our entire routine. And it's unkind to ourselves if we don't acknowledge that life isn't normal right now, and it's hard, and that's okay. One of the most important things I tell people is that acknowledging that life isn't normal and it's not going to be normal, at least in the immediate future, is necessary to accept that it is what it is, because then once you've done that, you have a more realistic picture to work with in figuring out how you're going to adapt for the future. The next question is what is a new normal and how do I find this? So say we've accepted life is not normal, I need to move forward anyways. A new normal is how you make adaptations to your life and your daily experiences. They're often referred to as lifestyle changes, where you might see something not working well and then you self-reflect, figure out why it's not working well, and find a new way to still meet that need that you have. So say you can't go out to coffee with the ladies on Saturday afternoons anymore, but you still need that socialization. A person may find a new normal by instead meeting online using a video software format to still have coffee on Saturday afternoons with your friends and have that face-to-face interaction without the risk of everyone getting together in a location where there might be other people present and you're not able to properly socially distance. Creating a new normal is like finding ways to trick your brain out of survival mode. So here we are in October. It's been a few months since our lives have changed drastically. We're all tired and discouraged and confused about the future, but we know it's not helpful to continue to function in this hyper-aware, fearful state. And we need to find ways in the present to meet our needs so that we're not physiologically and cognitively impacted by our day-to-day experiences as much. Because if we have to continue to live our lives this way temporarily, we want to find some happiness and fulfillment, or at least more contentment and less fear in the meantime. That would just cause so much unnecessary stress and make us more likely to experience difficulties. So some of the ways that people have found to be helpful in adapting and creating their new normal is creating new routines that are manageable and aren't as difficult, don't have as many barriers that they have to overcome in order to do those things every day. Finding ways to access support systems like church or your community meeting. One of the ways that many healthcare providers have adapted is using telehealth services. And that way people can still access the care they need, and the providers can continue to provide the care instead of limitations that there were in the beginning on accessing some of those services. Because even during this time when COVID-19 is a concern to us in maintaining our health, some of us still had pre-existing health concerns or may have just health concerns that come up from everyday life that still need attended to. So we can't just stop taking care of ourselves because of the coronavirus. we have to find a way to still get all of our needs met, including health needs. So finding those adaptations and resources that are going to help you bring those things back into your life is very important right now. Back to practicing mindfulness and giving attention to the present moment. It's really hard to find adaptations if we are really focused on the future or the past. We kind of need to be familiar with the present and find a way to feel comfortable in it before we can have a realistic perspective of what it is that I need to change that will make my life a little bit easier for the foreseeable future. Again, mindfulness, I feel like a lot of people feel confused when they hear that word. There's lots of great resources out there about mindfulness, and there's so many ways you can practice that each person can find a method that's tailored to their specific needs and things that interest them or make them feel calm and present and grounded in the moment. There's many books about it. There's electronic resources like apps on your phone or on TV or using a sound machine or a guided meditation format, or like I said before, just practicing everyday activities mindfully by focusing all 5 of your senses on that activity when you're doing it. That's a very basic, simple way to practice mindfulness. Many people have asked me, what can help me be more adaptable to making these changes? Maybe we're a person who especially doesn't like change. It's harder for us than it is for other people. We need to practice being empathetic with ourselves and showing ourselves kindness that we often offer to other people, and acknowledge that it might be harder for you than it is for other people, and that's okay, and it's great that it's not as hard for those other people. But if it is hard for you, allowing yourself that time and patience to make some of these changes, and trying not to compare yourself to other people too much, because everyone's capabilities with that are going to be totally different. And just because it might take you longer or it might not come as easily doesn't mean that you're any less effective at it. Some of the other things that are important in building resilience or building your ability to be adaptable to changes or overcome barriers is creating some people refer to it as a resilience bank account. So you have this foundation of resources you can use when you need to if you come into contact with a significant stressor or a barrier to accessing what you need. So in your resilience bank account should be consistent sleep. So your brain is already getting that good sleep that it needs to set you up to be healthy, and giving your brain and body proper nutrition and exercise. Those are all things that keep those healthy, natural healing capacities going in your body every day. Meditation and mindfulness practices are wonderful to have in your resilience bank account, and it's great to have practiced those things before you need them, because it does take a bit of practice to be able to use it in those moments when you really need it and it's more difficult. There's more stress in your life. If you think about trying to acquire any new skill, if you're trying to learn to ride a bike, you're going to be much more effective at learning that when you're calm and life is good and you have that freedom to experiment with it than if you're super stressed because you have to ride your bike tomorrow and there's all of this pressure on you in this moment to learn how to ride your bike. And practicing mindfulness or meditation are the same way. We want to have practiced that before we need it in order to prepare ourselves for that really stressful time we could encounter. Again, practicing healthy self-compassion. I often tell people to think of it as tell yourself what you would tell a friend. Sometimes it's hard for us to be compassionate to ourselves or kind to ourselves, but it's a lot easier to do that with other people. So if it's difficult for you to do that, put yourself in a situation where you are thinking of what you would say to a friend and you're then telling yourself those kind things as a way to kind of get out of your ways of thinking every day and allow yourself a new perspective. Practicing gratitude. Some of you have probably heard of like a gratitude journal. Practicing gratitude every day is really important because, again, it changes our perspectives. If I had a terrible day, but I can pick out one thing in my day that I'm thankful for, then it's so much better. It balances the terribleness of that day a little bit. If I can pick out 3 things that I'm grateful for, that's even more so. And we might still feel exhausted and stressed from our terrible day, but when we wake up in the morning, we're still going to have that gratitude that we can start the next day with. So another way to shift your perspectives and the way you think about things when everything feels overwhelming. Staying connected, again, is super important. Whatever method you use, some is better than none. So even if it is on the phone, you're not getting that face-to-face, it's still going to help you more than being isolated. As humans, we really need a lot of connection, and it's important for our brains to function properly, and we're just not meant to function in isolation. So finding a way to connect, even if it's just one, super important. And then saying no, which is difficult. When our lives are not normal, everything's more stressful, we're trying to find ways to adapt, that's overwhelming. That's a lot of work, and it's taking up a lot of our brain space. So we don't really have the energy or brain space to take on extra things that normally wouldn't be a problem for us to take on. It's really important to be able to say no to an offer or an opportunity if it's going to be something that ends up being stressful and overwhelming for us. So I often tell people to really listen to their gut reaction. If someone asks you to help out at this activity because they need more help because of social distancing, you really want to help, you think it would be really meaningful, but if you're super stressed and overwhelmed already, you're not going to serve in that role as well as you would before, and you're maybe going to lose out on some sleep or some time that you need to practice those other things that we were talking about earlier. So feeling comfortable saying no, on a bad day, and then allowing yourself that time to make adaptations, and then maybe it'll help you be more prepared to take on some of those extra things in the future once you have created your foundation of new normal. So say you feel like you're really on the road to finding your new normal and you want to start doing some of those things, you have the opportunity to say yes. It can be really helpful if you're selecting activities that are fulfilling and give you purpose and meaning. Again, we aren't getting as much of that from things we do every day, so we really need to maximize the benefit we get from those extra things we can say yes to by making sure they're things that are important to us and are going to make us feel better after we do them. So if you're having to prioritize your energy and brain space to one activity instead of 4 that you would normally do, because everything's harder and you're more tired because nothing's normal, but you're finding a new normal, being able to prioritize the one that's going to give you the most emotional benefit, the most satisfaction in doing it, is really going to be helpful in feeling more comfortable with your new normal and feeling like you're still getting those things we all really need in our lives. We can make sense of really terrible things if we can find a way to have purpose and meaning every day, even if it's only momentary. A really good saying that I like to share with people is, when everything feels hopeless, help someone else. Because even if we don't know how to solve the problems in our own lives, or even if most of what's going on in our own lives and causing us struggles is completely out of our control, we do have control of how we interact with other people, and offering someone else kindness and compassion is meaningful and purposeful to ourselves, and also meaningful and kind to someone else, and they will most likely reflect that to you, and you'll feel good about that as well. So then you're meeting that connection need in addition to that, and it can offer both people a sense of restoring normalcy and restoring a sense of control from something that seems very simple, like offering a little bit of help to someone. So that's all I had for today, but let me know if there are any other questions you might have that I can answer, or if you have other information for me that you would like to share. I would like to offer some resources everyone can look into on their own, as each of you are finding ways to gain your sense of a new normal and go on living day to day without feeling so restricted or controlled by all of the overwhelming things going on around us. And humans are hardwired to be adaptable and resilient, and we all have those capacities in there. We just need to tap into them and give our bodies and brains the right resources so they can function how it already knows how to do. Even we can trust that our bodies and brains can take the lead if we just give them the right ingredients. Thank you all for your time and allowing me to share this information with you today.